Marvin Walden was a bully and had been so for most of his life. His earliest thoughts including visiting other families and being mean to whoever he was playing with. None of the family pets would go near him in fear of what he had previously done to them. It seemed that pets such as aquarium fish and hamsters would mysteriously disappear, and Marvin would always have an alibi when that happened. He was not particularly big and strong, but big enough that, when coupled with his viciousness, caused most other kids to fear him. It was because of this maliciousness that he had no friends, or even kids that pretended to be his friend. It would seem that there was nothing short of a miracle that could curb his reign of terror over the neighborhood's kids. Therefore, a miracle of sorts was overdue, and was now in the process of manifesting itself. It was late October, and the Halloween season was in full swing. Kids were choosing their costumes, parents were stocking up on candy. Something else, however, was silently happening in the background. Unnoticed and unobserved, something had moved into the neighborhood and was also preparing for Halloween. Something that had been there once before, and something that was coming once again. It is with this background we begin our story. It was now Halloween Day, and Marvin's school had just let out. Marvin started walking home, as he and many of the other kids in his neighborhood lived within walking distance of their school. As Marvin approached his house, there was a black cat casually walking the sidewalk in front of him. Marvin, looking around to see if anyone was looking, quickly ran up to the cat and, in true soccer style, made a side kick to the poor cat, which was promptly ejected high into the air. It made a loud, growling-like screech as it was hurled up into the middle of a cedar tree that was beside the sidewalk. It then settled on one of the branches and became completely silent, perhaps still trying to get his breath back, or perhaps the scowling look in his eyes as it gazed at Marvin pointed to something else. Marvin was pleased with himself that the cat had went much higher in the air than he thought even possible. Marvin then started back towards his home, having concluded there was no one around to witness the deed, but then saw Rhoda Green standing in the yard across the street, who, holding her hand against her mouth, apparently saw the entire thing. Rhoda was a couple of years older than Marvin, and had never shown herself to be afraid of him, a fact Marvin acknowledged as he resumed his way to his house, confident he could lie his way out of any consequences. Marvin entered his house and turned on the TV, remembering his favorite horror show series was starting shortly. These hour-long serials featured a maniacal killer wearing a leather mask, someone that he was fond of dressing up on Halloween as, and in fact he had already decided to do so again tonight. He went into his bedroom and picked up the mask he was going to wear off the night table beside his bed. All he had to do to complete the costume was to put on a mechanic's overall and grab his hatchet. Just before returning to the room the TV was in, he heard a bump against the window. He went over to the window and looked out, and thought he saw something moving behind a tree. Marvin ran out of the back door and into the area where his window was. He looked behind all the trees and behind the tool shed, but saw nothing, at least at first. When suddenly, in the corner of his eye, he caught something small moving behind the side of the house. Marvin ran over to where he had gone, but it was no longer there. Looking towards the front of the house and the street, he saw what looked like a black cat prancing into the yard that was across the street. He assumed that this was the same cat he had kicked earlier, turned, and then started towards the back door to go back into the house. As he reached over to open the door, he again saw something looking at him from the other side of the house, but it was gone as soon as he looked directly at it. Getting inside, Marvin began to look at each window to see if he could catch a glimpse of whatever was in the yard. After a few minutes, he realized his TV show had already started and sat down to watch it. Halloween night had begun in earnest as the show Marvin was watching ended, and several trick-or-treaters had come by the house for candy. Marvin put on his costume, grabbed a large burlap sack, and went out for the evening. Since he dressed up the same costume every year, most kids recognized who he was and avoided him. Instead of a polite trick-or-treat, he would use a demand like, "Your treats or your life." This night, as he made his way around the neighborhood, he continued to see something quickly darting across the sidewalk in front of him, or between the hedges in yards as he passed. Whatever it was, it would appear to be larger each time he got a glimpse of it. As Marvin continued to look around the area, hoping to find out what was going on, he approached a cedar tree where he had catapulted the cat earlier today, with Rhoda standing beside it. Rhoda was on her way to finish an important task when she first saw Marvin's evil deed and was unable to fully investigate the cat's fate at the time. She had now returned to check on it, and she was looking up at the tree as Marvin approached. Rhoda told Marvin that she could hear the poor cat and it must be hurt. Marvin stopped and looked up also, and was also able to hear a weak cry coming from the middle of the tree. Rhoda exclaimed that she was going to get help as she sharply turned and started towards her home. Marvin shouted after her that he would get it down, but Rhoda replied that since it was hurt, she was telling her mom. Marvin thought to himself that he had better get the stupid cat out of the tree before anyone got back and discovered it up there. He would take the cat to a remote area and leave it there, and with no cat, no blame could be credibly made against him. Marvin laid down his bag and hatchet and quickly climbed the cedar tree where he estimated the cat had landed. He could hear it stirring just above him, and he concluded that it was now trying to get away from him. He then reached where the cat was to grab it. To his horror, a large, black, fur and clawed hand reached down and grabbed his arm, causing Marvin to scream. Marvin continued to scream and then pleaded for help as the hand quickly pulled him up further into the tree. The cedar tree shook violently for a minute or two and then suddenly stopped, followed by complete silence. When Rhoda and her mom and dad arrived at the cedar tree the cat was in, they found Martin's burlap bag, mask, and hatchet on the ground nearby. But there was no longer a cry coming from the tree. Rhoda's dad climbed the tree to about the middle, but soon came down after finding nothing. As the three stood there, a particularly plump black cat pranced by and started heading away from the neighborhood. The footsteps of this cat were unusual, Rhoda thought, as instead of being near silent like a cat, she was hearing footsteps of something that could be much larger. Rhoda then tried to catch the cat to see if it was all right, but the cat saw her coming and took off out of the area, too fast for her to catch it. Marvin's parents and the authorities began a search for Marvin, which lasted for weeks, but he was never found. It is said that on every Halloween night after that, a cat can be heard crying in this same cedar tree. And on a Halloween with a bright moon, many have reported they have seen a specter wearing a leather mask looking up aimlessly at the tree. And so, if you hold to the belief that black cats are harbingers of bad luck, there just might be some merit in this notion after all, especially if one is a bully.